If you're only focused on creating art right now and nothing else, it's going to be much more difficult for you to grow your brand and get investors interested in your work. So a while back, I reached out to different artists and investors in the NFT scene and asked them to give their best advice when it comes to selling their work. But I also wanted to toss in some of my own experiences based on the past decade I've spent in branding and marketing. I've gathered my 3 most important pieces of advice to hopefully get some of you moving in the right direction when it comes to building your brand and making your creative career a full-time job. So here's how I'm dividing up today's topics. You'll also see timestamps for each section in the description, starting with making your brand appealing to investors, thinking differently from your competitors, and getting involved with the community. Starting off with the first piece of advice, and in my eyes the most important, and that is the challenge to make your brand appealing to investors. So what do I mean by that? The reason why this recent art boom has been so successful is due to the introduction of investors putting money into the digital art market, hoping to get a profit. And this is not only true to crypto art, but any collectible we see out there, so designer shoes, traditional art, trading cards, and so on. And just like any other market, the main thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to collectible goods, the value of a product is completely up to the buyer and their desire to own that product. I'll give a perfect example that happened last month, and that was Jack Dorsey, aka the co-founder and CEO of Twitter, auctioning off his first ever tweet as an NFT and selling it for $2.9 million. When you look at the surface of what he's truly auctioning off, he's essentially selling pixels on a screen that mark a specific moment in history, but conceptually it means so much more than that. This is where the collectible mindset becomes important, because now a single person can become the owner of that piece of history, and that in itself has a certain value that cannot be defined by a single number. We get to choose that value, and the person that wants it more is going to pay more for it. So why am I telling you this, and how do you apply it to your own brand? Going back to this idea of investing in digital art, there are people out there in any collectible market that will buy a product for a certain price, hoping that someone out there will want it more than them, whether it's immediately or in the future, and will be willing to pay a higher price for that item. This is where you come into play, and to put it simply, a majority of the time investors aren't just investing in your art, they're investing in you as a person. They need to feel confident that when buying your artwork, your brand will continue to grow and increase in value, therefore increasing the value of your artwork. This means that you have to do so much more than just create art. You really need to show that you have the ability to scale your business, whether that be your relevance on social media, the public's perception of you through publications, interviews, collaborations, and the overall strength of your personal brand identity. It's going to take a lot of patience and multitasking, and ultimately at some point you should start to feel like you're running your own business, but by building your brand alongside the art you produce, you'll find that more and more investors will begin to take interest in your work, and you'll be able to confidently scale your prices as a result of that growth. When you take the time to do this properly, both you and the investor are going to benefit from your actions, and you'll be able to build trust between the two of you. I'll end by saying that the 2 most important factors in achieving this growth successfully is going to be patience and confidence. Patience through being intentional, thoughtful, and strategic about every action you take, building out your brand slowly and organically, and confidence in knowing that you're making the right moves, even if it takes time to see results. This confidence will be especially important in making the decision to lift your prices once you feel like you've made it to that next step, and by being intentional with your brand and trusting the process, you'll be able to feel a lot more confident in the decisions you make with your career, which is why patience and confidence kind of go hand in hand for brand growth. You essentially need to have both to see that long-term success. The bottom line here is, if you're only focused on creating art right now and nothing else, it's going to be much more difficult for you to grow your brand and get investors interested in your work. Moving on to the second piece of major advice, and that is how to break boundaries by thinking differently from those around you. This one sounds like it would be straightforward, but obviously thinking different can be a challenge since it requires you to take a path with essentially no guidance or directions, and that can be really scary, especially if you're a new artist and you don't want to start your career by making mistakes. But the amazing thing about thinking differently is that there is a way to get a preview of whether or not it will work, and that's by looking at the past when you think about the future. So my goal here for this section is to give you some examples of people who have taken risks by thinking differently and how you can become that next person through thoughtful observation and asking yourself the right questions. I have a few examples here, and the first one is Beeple's Everyday collection, but more specifically the physical pieces that were sent to the original owners of those NFTs. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because it adds demand by including extra incentives to buy. It also bridges the gap by appealing to both physical and digital collectors. And nowadays you constantly see people including add-ons with their NFTs, whether it's a physical print, an LED display, unlockable content, anything that gives the collector the feeling that they're getting more value for their money and that they're being offered something that is appealing to collect. The second example tackles the issue of community and longevity, and that is Larona's Boys and Girls. If you haven't heard about these, they're basically a series of 3D statues that come in a variety of designs, some of them having up to 100 copies and a few being exclusive one-of-ones. But design aside, the main attractiveness of these pieces is that they have created a community centered around those that own them. Similar to CryptoPunks, owning one of these statues acts as your ticket into this exclusive community that is shared amongst other owners and collectors. And the sense of community is powerful because it has a strong presence on social media. You'll see that it's very common for owners to place the image of the piece they own in their profile or banner just as a statement that they're a part of this group. And that presence does two things. It creates a sense of demand for those that don't own them, otherwise known as the fear of missing out. And it also builds longevity for the collection since the images are constantly on display. And because of that, they're always in the conversation and the hype for them as a series never seems to die out. So the main point here is that this project was able to think differently by approaching NFTs from a community perspective rather than just being abstract art. Obviously, this will only work if you're recognized enough in the community and have the attention of investors that will back you, but I still think it's a very important observation to keep in mind for the future. And for the last example, and one of my favorite approaches to NFTs is a series called My Journey by Too Much Lag. What makes this different is that along with the artwork you're buying, the specific edition you have has a unique character artwork attached to it that is randomized based on the edition you own. So for example, someone who has edition 10 will be able to unlock a character that has different features from someone who owns edition 100, and the coolest part is some features are harder to find than others. This basically tackles two different things in NFTs, and that is one, the issue of collectors feeling like they don't get to own a piece of artwork when it has thousands of copies, since now they get a one-of-one copy included with their edition, and two, it adds onto the demand of the artwork by basically including gambling, similar to when you open a pack of collectible trading cards. That incorporation of randomness and rarity to a project is always going to add an extra layer of excitement to it, because people will want to be the owner of the rarest copy, right? So those are my three examples, and you might be thinking to yourself, why is it important to observe these things if they've already been done before? And the main point I want to make in this section is that if you look deeper into the roots of all of these really unique examples, you'll notice that they all have a similar theme around them, which is that they always address problems in the industry and find creative solutions that appeal to their audience. Whether it's dealing with the issue of demand, longevity, competition, or rarity, these solutions from these artists not only stand out from other crypto art you would find online, but it makes them more desirable because it shows that these people are willing to push boundaries and evolve the industry. Like I said in the first section, being able to show that your brand is capable of growing the industry you're a part of is going to become very valuable and attractive when it comes to investors seeing you and your work. I'll end by saying that if you want to be the next person to come up with a groundbreaking idea, ask yourself this: what is the industry struggling with? What is it lacking, and what can I do to solve these problems? You'll find that if you can address these issues first, you'll be given an answer that will set you on the path to be truly unique from other artists in the industry. Speaking of the industry, moving into this last section, I wanted to talk about your individual role and involvement in the community. This is by far the easiest piece of advice to follow and only requires you to have patience and be willing to meet other people who share a similar passion as you. There are some general rules to follow when it comes to making your way in the community, so I wanted to split this section into 3 things you should do just to make it very clear what I mean by getting recognized in any industry, right? Starting off with the first thing you should always do, and that is 1, you should always connect with people that you have no intention of gaining from. This sounds like it would be very obvious, but I've been in the esports and gaming industry for almost 10 years now, and it is very easy for me to tell when someone is trying to get to know me purely to take advantage of what I've built over the years, and I know I'm not the only person that's able to recognize this too. Speaking from my personal journey, what worked for me is that I started out at the bottom, became close with a few friends in the community. Some of them quit over the years, but some of them grew up to be industry leaders and helped push me forward in my career. The bottom line is that I never became friends with any of them knowing where they would end up. The only thing that brought us together is the passion we shared as creatives, and being able to surround yourself with other people that have that same passion as you is more important than anything when it comes to getting involved in the community. The next thing you should do is focus on your personal growth and let people discover your talent once you've taken the time to master it. This piece of advice almost seems counterintuitive to networking because you would think that your goal should be to connect with other people, but what I've noticed is that if you spend too much time focusing only on other people, you'll never be able to improve yourself personally, and it will be really easy to fall behind in the community. Going back to personal experiences, I found that I was growing extremely slow in the design industry until I took a minute to focus on my education, improve my knowledge of branding and marketing, and when I came back, I was able to provide information that was so much more valuable that it was difficult for other people to ignore or deny it. The general takeaway here is that you need to make sure you're prepared and that your talent can back you up and prove to other people that you're worthy of receiving their attention. The final thing you should do, and one of the most underrated pieces of advice, is to research the industry to a point where you can have meaningful conversations with others that are also involved in it. This was a huge mistake I made when I first started getting into NFTs that hopefully you can learn from, but I initially jumped into the scene with basically no knowledge of how things worked or why any of it was significant, and the result of it is that nobody really took me seriously. Once I started researching more on the industry and the work of the people involved, I was able to grasp a stronger understanding of what this all means to artists, investors, and the future of creatives in general, and because of that, I was able to have more meaningful conversations with others in the industry, and it was much easier for me to find friends and people that resonated with my own beliefs. If you take the time to be properly informed, you'll find that not only will it be easier to connect and relate to other artists in the industry, but you'll also be able to discover what makes you passionate and maybe even what direction you want to take yourself as an artist. So that is all 3 major pieces of advice I have for you today. If you have any questions for me, you can find me on Twitter and Twitch at Nowack Design. I'm live every Saturday and teach content similar to what you watched today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.